Java methods. In this video, we will learn how to create Java methods. During the Python unit, we explored Python methods in 3 different phases. We first explored methods that perform the same exact action every single time. Then we introduced methods with parameters. And then finally, we introduced methods that return a value. In this video, we're going to do the same exact thing, but we're going to do so using the Java programming language. So the first question is, where do we write the code to create a new method? Well, firstly, it must be done inside the class, inside the public class. That's the first requirement. Then, within the public class, there are 2 places we can write it. We can write it before the main method, or we can write it after the main method. Java allows both, but for this video, we're simply going to focus on writing it before the main method. Our first example will simply be a method that performs the same task every single time. The header for such a method will always begin with the 3 keywords public, static, void. Now, do not worry about the definition of these 3 keywords. We don't need to worry about that right now. The meaning of void will be discussed later on in this video, and the meaning of public and static will be discussed in a later unit. But for now, don't worry about the meaning. Just know that when we're defining a method that's going to perform the same exact action every single time, public, static, void is how we start it off. After that, we write the name of the method. In this example, we're going to name it print line break because that is what our method is going to do. It's going to print out a line break. After the name, put an empty set of parentheses. Then an open curly brace, which indicates that we're about to begin typing the definition of our method, the code, the body of our method. Then in the next line, we indent, then type the code that we want executed whenever the method gets called, i.e. the body of our method. After typing the body of our method, we type the closed curly bracket to indicate that we've now ended the method. Now, that all being said, just because we wrote the definition of a method does not mean that when we click the run button, the method will get executed. When we click run, only the main method will get executed. If we want our newly created method to get executed, then we need to call it inside the main method. So when we hit the run button, the main method gets executed. And what do we have written inside the main method? The first statement says print hello world. Then after that, we call the print line break method, which prints out the 5 stars, which is what we defined it to do. So, in summary, when defining a new method that's going to perform the same exact action or actions every single time, the first step is to type public static void, followed by the name you want to give that method, followed by an empty set of parentheses, then the body of the method enclosed within a pair of curly brackets. Now, suppose instead of printing out the same number of star characters every single time, I want to vary that number. Perhaps print out 3 star characters in one instance, 10 in another, then 15 in another, then 20 in another, so on and so forth. One way to do this would be through a parameter. Just like in Python, if I want to define a method with parameters, then I need to list those parameters inside the parentheses. The only difference in Java is that I must also write the type of the parameter before the name. In this example, I want my parameter to be an integer because that integer is going to represent the number of star characters I want printed out. So inside parentheses, I write the word int followed by len, L-E-N, which is short for the word length. Then, just to save some space, I'm going to change the name of the method to printlb. Okay, just to save space, no other reason. Then inside the body of the method, I'm going to use the parameter to print out the number of characters I want. I write a for loop where the number of iterations will be equal to the value of the parameter. Then inside that for loop, we print out a single star character each time. Notice that I used the system.out.print method instead of println. This is because I want each star to be printed side by side. I don't want them printed out on their own separate line. Now, with all that said, with this method written as is, this line in the main method now will cause an error message for 2 reasons. The first reason is there is no print line break method. Remember, we change the name of the method to printlb. Thus, there does not exist a method called println_break, thus triggering an error message. Now, suppose I change it to printlb. Okay, the name's correct, but we still have an issue. We defined the printlb method to expect one integer parameter, but in the main method, we didn't give it any parameters. This will trigger an error message because we never defined a printlb method that receives no parameters. We only defined one that receives one int parameter. Thus, we need a number in there. So we put 10. That gets rid of the error message. And since 10 is the value of the parameter, that's how many iterations will be performed inside the body of the method. Thus, when we execute the main method, of course, hello world will get printed out first. Then the printlb method will get invoked with the value 10 as the parameter. 10 stars gets printed out. Now suppose I add another line where I call the printlb method passing 3 as a parameter. Well, in this case, 3 stars gets printed out. The next phase of methods we will explore are methods that return a value. Suppose I want to define a method named sum that receives 2 integers as parameters, adds them up, then returns their sum. Once again, the first step would be to declare the method as public and static. Once again, the definitions of these keywords do not matter at the moment. Do not worry about it. We will define them later on in the unit. After that, since our method is going to be returning a value, we cannot use void. Earlier, we used void because our methods were not returning anything. But now in our next example, our method will return a value. It's going to return an integer. Thus, we need to write the word int to declare that this method is going to return an int value. If we were to type void and still attempt to return an int value, this will trigger an error message. Now, after this return type, the next step is to write the name of the method. We'll call it sum. Then after that, inside a pair of parentheses, we're going to list our parameters. The parameters here in this example are 2 integers. These are the integers we're going to add up. After that, we have the body of our method enclosed inside a pair of curly brackets. In the first line of this body, we declare an integer z and set it equal to the sum of x and y. Then in the next line, we return z. Z is the value that the method is going to give back to the program. It's the value that's going to get returned. And notice that the type for z matches the return type that we stated back in the header of the method. We stated that the method was going to return an int, and that's exactly what we did inside the definition of the method. Now let's take a look at how this method can be used inside the main method. In this example, we invoke the sum method twice. The first time, giving it 3 and 5 as the parameters. Thus, 3 and 5 get added up to give us 8. 8 gets returned by the method. 8 gets printed out to the screen. Then, the second time we invoked the sum method, we gave 10 and 15 as the 2 parameters. 10 and 15 get added up to get 25. 25 gets returned by the method. That value gets printed out by the println method to print 25 to the screen. Now, consider this method example. Here, once again, we start with public static, but now we're returning a string. That's going to be the type of value this method is going to return. And the name of the method is hello, and it receives 1 parameter of type string. Then, inside the body of the method, we concatenate the parameter with the string hello to perform a short sentence. Hello, name. That sentence gets stored inside the string called greeting. Greeting gets returned by the method. Let's observe a couple of examples of this method being used inside our main method. In the first example, we pass the name John as a parameter. John gets concatenated with the word hello. Hello John gets returned by the method, and thus hello John gets printed out to the screen. In the second example, Katie gets passed as a parameter to the method. Katie gets concatenated with the word hello. Hello Katie gets returned by the method, and thus hello Katie gets printed out to the screen.